To understand why NATO feared the Soviet Union's tanks so profoundly, one must look deeper into the Soviet concept of war itself, a doctrine forged in the fires of the Eastern Front and refined in the years that followed. The Soviets believed, above all, in the primacy of offense, in the idea that wars were not won by holding ground, but by smashing through the enemy's defenses with overwhelming force and carrying the fight deep into their territory. This philosophy was not theoretical. It was born from lived experience. During World War II, Soviet generals like Zhukov and Rokossovsky had orchestrated vast offensives involving thousands of tanks, supported by mechanized infantry and waves of artillery, that broke the back of the German Wehrmacht. They called it deep battle, a doctrine that envisioned not just a single strike, but successive echelons of forces, waves of armored spearheads punching through front lines, followed by motorized divisions and reserves that exploited the breakthrough, ensuring that even if the first assault was blunted, the second and third would crush resistance. After 1945, this doctrine was not abandoned but institutionalized, drilled into the very structure of the Red Army, and taught in every Soviet military academy. The tank became the symbol of Soviet military thought, not merely a weapon, but the instrument of history itself, the hammer that would smash capitalist Europe should the Cold War turn hot. By the early 1950s, Soviet exercises in East Germany showcased this doctrine with chilling realism. Divisions of T-34S and T-54S advancing in tight formations, practicing river crossings under fire, and simulating rapid thrusts toward the Rhine. Western observers who studied these maneuvers were struck not just by the sheer numbers, but by the Soviet willingness to accept staggering losses to achieve a breakthrough. Where NATO planners thought in terms of conserving strength, the Soviets thought in terms of momentum. If thousands of tanks were destroyed in the first days of battle, thousands more would pour in behind them, overwhelming defenders through sheer persistence and scale. The doctrine also reflected the Soviet understanding of geography. Europe's flat plains and dense road networks were ideal for mechanized warfare, and Soviet strategists envisioned exploiting these corridors to maximum effect. Key routes through the Fulda Gap, the North German Plain, and the Danube Valley were mapped and rehearsed repeatedly, with entire Soviet armies trained to surge forward along these axes. To NATO generals, the implications were terrifying. They were not facing a defensive adversary, but one preparing relentlessly for a massive armored invasion. And unlike Germany in 1940, the Soviet Union's industrial base was enormous and relatively secure, stretching deep into the Eurasian interior, beyond the reach of conventional bombing campaigns. This meant that even a prolonged conflict would see Soviet factories continue to churn out tanks, ensuring a steady supply of reinforcements. The very design of Soviet tanks reflected this doctrine. They were not built to be comfortable or technologically exquisite, but to be reliable, rugged, and easily mass-produced. For every pattern, the Soviets could field 3 T-54S, and in a war of attrition, numbers could prove decisive. Intelligence reports filtering into NATO headquarters painted a grim picture. Tens of thousands of Soviet armored vehicles stationed in Eastern Europe, backed by elite shock armies, and supported by a logistical machine designed to move fuel, ammunition, and spare parts at lightning speed. If war came, NATO forces would be facing not just an armored force, but a military system designed to sustain an armored blitzkrieg across an entire continent. For Western policymakers, this reality forced a painful admission. They were up against a military doctrine that embraced risk, prioritized speed, and envisioned victory in days, not months.